Hi everyone, welcome to our December stitch guide. This is our last stitch guide for the Winging It project, and I've saved some of my favourite stitches for last. This month we're going to be exploring string stitches. So these are stitches that are worked along a line, and the working thread is going to form a string on which our stitches are sort of hung. So they're going to look almost like a string of beads. You'll see as we go along. The first one we're going to look at, I'm going to work on this line, and you can see that I'm working sideways. So I've turned my hoop to the side and I'm going to be working right to left, which is fairly unusual for a right-handed stitcher, but that is the way that this stitch is worked. So I've brought my thread up on my line, and you might be able to see I've marked ½ centimetre intervals all the way along my line, and that's going to guide my placement of my string stitches. So the first thing I want to do is lay my thread along the line that I'm working on, and what I'm going to do is curl it back around. So I'm making a sort of almost teacup shape there. So I've gone along my line and then I've curled my thread back round. And I'm going to find my first marker, which is here, and I want to take my needle down through the fabric just above the line, and I want to bring it out just catching a few threads. I'm just going to lift that thread off so you can see I've just caught a few threads there with my needle, a few threads of the fabric. So I'm just going to replace that, and I want my thread to go over the needle as it's passing under the fabric, but this curved bit I want to pass underneath my needle. So this is the arrangement we're looking for, where we've got our thread going over where the needle's passing through the fabric, looping back around and coming underneath the needle. So that's the little arrangement that we've got. And then when I pull my needle through, that is going to form a little knot sitting on my line there. So now I repeat the process again. I'm going to lay my thread along the line, I'm going to find my marker, take my needle down through the fabric and back out with the thread passing over the top. Then I'm going to bring my thread underneath the tip of the needle like that. So my needle is always working vertically at 90 degrees to the line that I'm stitching along. So thread goes horizontally along the line, needle goes down and back up, catching a little bit of fabric, and the thread comes round and underneath the needle there, and I pull through. And we just repeat that all the way along the line. The trick to getting a really good finish with this stitch is to make sure you're catching about the same amount of fabric each time, and to evenly space your little knots. So that's why I've marked the fabric before I started. You want to keep your tension even as well, because if you pull some knots tighter than others, they will be different sizes. Now, coral stitch can be used as a fill stitch, particularly in Jacobean embroidery, and you can lay lines of this really close together and you can offset the little knots. So I could make another line of coral stitch, and on my second line I would place my knots in between the knots that I've already made, and you can create quite a textured fill by doing that. So at the end of the line, I'm just going to take my needle back through to the back of the fabric, and I can secure it on the back, and that's coral stitch. So our next stitch is called a Danish knot, and I'm going to work that on this line here. And again, you might be able to see that I've put in some markers. That's where my knots are going to sit. Now, to start this one off, I'm going to make one long string all the way along. the line that I want to cover. And what we're going to do is place some knots along this string. So I'm going to start at this first marker here, and I want to bring my needle up so that it's coming out underneath that long stitch that I've put in. And I'm going to form a sort of T shape like that. So my working thread is coming below the line. And now I want to take my needle over the top of the line and pass it underneath the line to the left of that working thread. Like that. And I'm going to pull it along so that it sits on my marker. And now I've got this loop here that's coming out underneath. And I'm going to take that down again, but this time to the right of the knot, and this time I want it to pass over this loop of thread that's created. So here's my working thread, I'm looping it round, I'm going to take my needle down underneath the line to the right of my knot and over the top of my working thread loop, and then pull it through. And what we get is a little knot that's almost shaped like a heart or a Danish pastry. And at that point, I'm going to take my needle back through the fabric underneath the knot on my marker. And so we get this little love heart shaped knot. So let me show you that again. I'm coming up on my next marker so that my needle comes up underneath my working thread and forms a T shape. I'm going to loop round and take my thread underneath my line to the left of my marker and pull through. Then I'm going to loop my thread round again and take it underneath the line to the right of the marker and over the top of my working thread like that, and then back through the fabric on my marker. So again, up on my marker, loop my thread around and down to the left and pull through, then down. I'm always working top to bottom here and over my thread loop, pull it tight, and then take my needle back through underneath so that my knot sits up like a little heart. If I bring that up to the camera, hopefully you can see those little heart-shaped knots there. They look a bit like Danish pastries all along the line. So that's the Danish knot. So you can see that I've rotated my hoop to the right, so my lines are going vertically, and we're going to work down this next line here. And the next stitch we're going to learn is rope stitch. I'm going to start by bringing my needle out at the top of my line, just at the top there, and I want my thread to go to the left for the time being. I'm going to take my needle down just below where that thread came out and rock it so that I'm catching some fabric a good ½ centimetre. So I'm just going to leave my needle sitting there because our next stage is to manipulate this working thread. So it's currently coming out to the left. I want my thread to pass over the top of the needle to the right, and then I want it to go back under the needle to the left. So I'm creating an S, a letter S shape, looping around my needle. So over the needle and then under the needle. And I'm going to take that loop over the top just to keep it out of the way, and I'm going to pull my needle all the way through, and that's going to catch that letter S almost like a twisted chain like that on the surface of my fabric. So now I want my thread to go to the left again. What I want to do is find that midpoint on that first stitch and that's where I'm going to take my needle down. Then I'm going to bring it up just below the end of that first stitch, and I'm going to loop my thread again, so over to the right, then under to the left to form my letter S. Loop it up and pull it through like that. So again, I'm going to find my halfway point on my stitch, take my needle down and up again just below the end of that first stitch. I'm going to go over the top of my needle and then under my needle and pull through. So halfway down my stitch, down and up, take my thread over my needle and then under my needle, over the top to get it out of the way, and then pull through. And what we should be creating, I will show you a close-up, is a series of links that look like rope. So at the end of your line, you're just going to take your thread down and finish off on the back. And if I bring it up close, you should be able to see there that rope-like texture on the stitches. It's a great one for lettering if you want to make your lettering bolder. So that's rope stitch. So we're back to working horizontally again, and I'm going to work this next stitch on this line here. We're going to look at scroll stitch. We're working left to right this time. So again, I'm going to bring my needle through at the end of my line, and I want to make a loop that goes clockwise. So I'm just going to loop my thread around in a little circle like that, creating a scroll. That's why it's called scroll stitch. It also looks like little scrolls. So I've got my little spiral there, and I want to bring my needle down on a bit of a diagonal. So I'm taking my needle down just above the line and up just below the line, a little bit like we did with coral stitch. I've caught a bit of fabric there, and I want my needle to pass over the thread both times. So my thread's going underneath the needle at the top and under it again at the bottom. Okay, and then I'm going to pull through, and we have a little scroll. So again, I'm going to make a little clockwise loop like that, and I'm going to take my needle down just above the line, up just below the line, and pull through. So little loop, down and up, and pull through. And again, I want these to be fairly evenly spaced. I haven't marked them this time, so I am kind of eyeballing it. So clockwise loop, down just above the line, up just below the line, making sure my needle is over the top of the thread both times, and pull through. This is a really nice one. It looks a little bit like waves, and you can go back and just even out the curves on those stitches if needs be. I'm going to work a few that are really close together just so that you can see the different effect that's created. So we've got a very different effect there. So I'm just going to finish the line. So once again, at the end of the line, we're just going to take our thread down like that. So here we've got scroll stitch worked quite spaced out, worked very close together. And these are sort of medium-sized diagonals. These are very tiny diagonals, and that's it, more spaced out again with smaller diagonals. If you are worried about the evenness of your lines, you can go back a little bit and just even them up so they look neater. There we go. And that's scroll stitch. So this one's similar to a Danish knot, but this one is called a double knot, and we're going to work along this line here. And this is a series of individual stitches, but we're going to join them up into a string. So I brought my thread up on the end of my line there, and a little bit like when I was doing coral stitch, I want my needle to be vertical where the line's horizontal, and I'm going to take my needle through the fabric just across the line, so going in just above the line and out just below the line like that. And I want to pull my thread through, so I've got a little slight diagonal stitch there. Now I'm going to take my needle round to the right, and I'm going to take it underneath that stitch without going through the fabric, just underneath the stitch like that, and pull through. So now I've got this sort of almost Y shape on its side. So we've got this stalk here and then a little V shape, and I want to take my needle round again, and this time I want to come through under that first horizontal stitch and bring it out just in between that fork of the Y there. And I want to bring my needle out so that it passes over that loop that I've made like that. So now I've got my first double knot on my string, and I want to create another one. So I'm going to work on this marker here. So once again, I'm going to take my needle down above the line and out underneath the line to create that slight vertical. I'm going to bring my needle round and underneath the horizontal stitch that I've just made to create that sort of Y shape. Then I'm going to bring my needle round again and go under that top fork and out in between that V. Take my needle through so it passes over the loop that I've created and pull through. So down and up, crossing the line, and pull through and under that stitch to create my fork prongs, then round again and under the top prong of the fork and out in between the fork and pass over that looped thread that I've just made. So down and up across the line, through and under to create my Y shape, round again and through in between the prongs of the fork, over my loop and pull through. And we just work like that all the way along the line. So if you run out of thread, I'm going to just take my needle back down underneath that double knot, and I can secure that on the back. Then I can bring my new thread up underneath that double knot so that it looks like the thread's coming out, and I just carry on as if nothing happened. So there's double knot stitch, very similar to coral stitch, but with that extra step that makes the knots a lot chunkier. So our next one, we're going to work along this line here, and we're going to work something called Portuguese knotted stem stitch. And we know with stem stitch that we always start at the beginning of our line, so I'm going to be working up, and we're going to start off in the normal way for stem stitch. So I'm going to work 1 stitch length forward and half a stitch length back, like that, and bring my needle out halfway along. When I pull through, I'll create that T shape that we're familiar with stem stitch. This time though, I'm going to create some extra steps before we stitch our next stitch. I'm going to curl my thread over the top and bring my needle underneath that first stitch, just below where my thread is coming out, like that, and gently pull it through so that the thread loops around the stitch. And then I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to loop around and come through underneath that vertical stitch and below where the thread is emerging, like that. So I've created 2 wraps around my first stitch. So now I'm going to move a stitch length forward. So I've got that half stitch. I want to go another half stitch length further on and bring my needle through, and then bring my needle back up at the point where that first stitch ended. So I've got my new stem stitch with my T shape, and we repeat the process again. So I'm looping over the top and I'm bringing my needle underneath that vertical, beneath where the thread's emerging, over the top again, and underneath the vertical thread, beneath where the working thread is emerging, and pull that through. So now that knot that I've created sits at the end of that first stitch. So again, I'm going to go down through the fabric half a stitch length further forward, back up where that stitch ended, and keeping my loop to the right and my needle to the left, pull through, loop around and slide under the vertical stitch, loop around and slide under the vertical stitch, and pull through. So again, on half a stitch length, back up halfway along, over the top and slide under, over the top and slide under, and then we just carry on like that all the way up our line. And at the end of your line, when you do your second wrap, just take your thread through the fabric at the back, and that's your Portuguese knotted stem stitch. If I bring that up close, you should be able to see the effect of that. Another really nice one for lettering. That's Portuguese knotted stem stitch. Right, so now we're going to work on this line here, and we're going to look at a stitch called purl stitch, and this one is very similar to coral stitch but with an extra step. So we're going to start in the same way. We've brought our thread up on the line over on the right hand side, and I'm going to bring my needle through the fabric, going in just above the line and out just below the line. So just like coral stitch, but this time I actually want to pull my thread through, and I want to pull it almost all the way, but just leave a little bridge there, little loop. I'm going to take my needle through that bridge, under that bridge from left to right. So I'm just working my needle through like that. And then I can pull the bridge down a little bit, and I'm going to pull my thread through to make a loop. And I'm going to bring my needle back down over the top of the loop and take it underneath the bottom of the loop like that. And then pull through. And when I pull through, I get this little sort of twisted knot on my line. So now I make my next stitch. So I'm just going to go a little way along and take my needle down just above the line, bring it up just below the line and pull through until I've got that little bridge again. Then I'm going to take my needle from left to right under the bridge, like that. Pull through until I've got a little loop, and I want to go over the top of the loop and under the bottom of the loop and pull through. So down just above the line, up just below the line, pull through until I've got a little bridge, through the bridge from left to right, pull through to make a loop, and then I want to go over the top of the loop and under the bottom of the loop and pull through. So down just above and up just below, pull through to make a bridge, under the bridge from left to right, over the top of my loop, under the bottom of my loop and pull through. So at the end of your line, you're just going to take your thread down underneath that last stitch, and there we've got pearl stitch. So similar to coral stitch, but with this extra lovely twist along the string. So this one, we're going to work on this line here, and this is a stitch called MOUNTMELLICK stitch, and these last two are probably the most complex of the stitches we're going to look at, but bear with it. If these are too much, just stick with your favourites from the options so far, but if you're up for a challenge, these might be right up your alley. So we're going to come up at the top of our line, and I am going to take my thread over the top and out of the way, and I'm going to take my needle down. I'm going to come out diagonally down from that stitch, come back through the fabric, diagonally down from where my thread came out, like that. And I want to create a little bit of a triangle, so I'm going to go diagonally down again and hook my needle through so that it comes back out on the line. So I'm directly down from where that thread first came out. I've gone down diagonally to take my needle in, and then down diagonally again to bring it back out. So you can see I've got the 3 points of a triangle there. And I'm going to bring my needle through, and that will create a little diagonal stitch like that, with my working thread back out on the line. Now I'm going to curl my thread over the top and take my needle through under that stitch that I've just made. I'm not going through the fabric, just passing underneath the stitch to create a little loop around. And then I'm going to loop the thread around again, and I'm going to take my needle back down at that first stitch where it first came out. So if you think of this as A, B and C, I'm taking my needle back down at A, like that. And I want to pull through until I've got a little loop on the surface, like that. Now to start my next stitch, I'm going to bring my needle up at C, so that bottom point on my triangle inside the loop, like that. And I'm going to pull my thread all the way through so that it is snug there, so that the loop catches on that little stitch. And now I repeat the process again. So I'm going to take my needle down diagonally, so I've got my thread coming out at A. I'm going to take it down diagonally, so now I'm underneath that point where my needle went down on the first stitch. I'm going to take my needle down directly below that on a diagonal, and I want to rock it back up on my line beneath where the thread's emerging. I want to try and keep these the same size as each other, so I want my little triangles to be the same size, and I want it to come up like that, and I'm going to pull all the way through, so I've created a little diagonal line from A to B. Now my thread loops over the top and passes under that diagonal stitch, and I pull through, and I'm going to take my needle back through at A, so that first point on the triangle where it first came out, back through at A, and pull through until I've got a little loop on the surface, and then I bring it through at C, so that bottom point on the triangle, and I make sure my needle is inside the loop there, and pull through until the loop is caught on that stitch that I've just made. So now I've got a new point A, so I'm going to go down at B, so diagonally down, down at B and up at C, so I'm forming my little triangle, and pull through to create that diagonal stitch. I'm going to take my thread through underneath that diagonal stitch and pull through, and I'm going to loop my thread around and go back down at A, pull through until I've got a little loop, and bring my needle up at C inside that loop, and we just carry on like that all the way down the line. So we start off with our little diagonal stitch. I want to keep my thread out of the way so I don't accidentally catch the loop. So down diagonally to go in, down diagonally again to come out and pull through, loop round and take the needle through underneath that diagonal line that we've just stitched, back through to the back of the fabric at A, pull through until we've got a little loop, and then back up through the fabric at C, inside the loop, and pull through. And we just carry on like that all the way down our line. This is such a pretty stitch. So that's how it's looking so far. I wondered if it might be helpful for you to see if I do a much larger version of the stitch. So I'm coming down diagonally, I'm going to come all the way down to here, and this is going to be my B. So the thread's coming out at A, coming down diagonally to B, and then I'm going to go down diagonally again to C. So here's A, B and C. So take my needle through. You won't get quite the same effect when it's stitched on this scale, but you'll be able to see it better. I'm looping my thread around and sliding my needle underneath that diagonal stitch and pulling all the way through. And then I'm looping my needle around again and taking it back through at A, that first point on the triangle, pulling through until I've got a loop, and then bringing my needle up at C inside that loop, pulling through until the thread is caught on the stitch. And now I've got a new A, so I'm going to come diagonally down to B. I want to be directly down from the previous stitch, and then diagonally down to C. Get that thread out of the way, you'll be able to see. So I've got A, B, C, pull through, loop my thread around, slide under the diagonal, down at A, pull through to get a loop, up at C, inside the loop, and pull through so the thread is caught. Like that, and that is MOUNTMELLICK stitch. I'm going to go back to doing some smaller ones. And at the end of the line, you take your needle back down at C over the top of the loop that you've pulled in and secure it on the back. And that's MOUNTMELLICK stitch. Stitch small and stitch a bit larger so that you can see. So our last stitch for the year is one of my absolute all-time favourites. I think this is so beautiful. It's called PALESTRINA stitch, and we're going to be stitching it down this line here. So we're going to start by coming out at the top of our line, and we're going to make a little stitch coming down just about 1/2 centimetre, and then I'm going to take my needle out just to the left of my line, so I'm making a sort of L shape. I've come down my line, and then I'm hooking a little tiny bit of fabric just to the left there, and I'm going to pull that through like that. Now I'm going to loop my thread underneath and take my needle underneath that stitch that I've just made and pull through. And when I pull up, I've created a little Y shape again, so I've got a diagonal stitch going up like that, crossing over the top of the vertical that I stitched. And what I want to do is loop my needle round again, and I want to catch my needle just under the bottom half of that vertical, so I'm sliding my needle through in between those little forks there, so just sliding through there, and I want to make sure my needle comes out through that loop that I've just made and pull through like that. So create a little almost triangular knot on the line there. So now I'm going to loop round again, and I'm going to come down just a short distance below that stitch, and like before I want to hook a tiny bit of fabric to the left of my stitch like that, trying to make it the same as the one above. So I'm starting my stitch again, I've come down and to the left, and I'm going to pull through, and that creates my little vertical. So now I'm going to go through my vertical from right to left like that and pull through, and that creates my little fork at the bottom, and loop round again and take my needle in between, underneath the bottom half of the vertical, in between the two parts of the fork, and I'm going to make sure that my needle comes out inside that loop that I've just created, and then I'll pull through like that. I come down a little way again, trying to keep the spacing nice and even, up a little way to the left like that. That went a bit far there. So down and up to the left to create my vertical. Loop round and go underneath that vertical and pull through. That creates a diagonal that makes a little fork at the bottom. Loop round again and take my needle diagonally down underneath that vertical and out in between the two prongs of the fork inside the loop and pull through. So down a little way and out to the left to make my vertical. Loop round and go through the vertical. Loop round again, come out in between, underneath the vertical, in between the prongs of the fork, inside the loop, and pull through. So at the bottom of your line, you just want to take, you can either add to the string or you can take your needle down just by the side of the knot, like that. And that is Palestrina stitch. That's my absolute favourite of our selection for this month. So there are our stitches for December. So we've looked at coral stitch, Danish knot, rope stitch, scroll stitch, double knot stitch, Portuguese knotted stem stitch, pearl stitch, MOUNTMELLICK stitch, and Palestrina stitch. Now these I've stitched on straight lines, but they are great for making curved lines as well. So they're superb for lettering, some of them. They are great as fill stitches if you work lines of them close together, and they can be used as decoration. So have a play, go with the ones that you feel confident with, see which ones are your favourite. I'd love to know which one you like the best. Do comment below. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you on Sunday for our first December video. Have fun, happy stitching, and I will see you soon. Bye.